The rain on HFY never stopped. It fell in greasy, metallic sheets across the landing pads of the primary transit hub, a sprawling complex of Karthasian design that processed cargo from a dozen conquered systems. Overseer Joresk, a bulky specimen of his species with slate-gray skin and 4 ocular lenses, stood before a shattered security station, his respiration flaring the gill-like slits along his neck. The smell of scorched composite and vaporized alloy clung to the air. 7 minutes, his security chief reported, voice trembling. They were inside for 7 minutes and took everything. Projectile weapons, power cells, encrypted comms. 18 dead, including the shift commander. Joresk's lenses focused on the wall above the console. There, painted in what appeared to be the blood of his dead soldiers, a crude symbol gleamed wetly under the emergency lights. It depicted a simplified planet with a single vertical line rising from its center, a banner unfurling. Below it, words in High Karthasic, smeared but legible, "Raise the banner." This was the 15th such attack in 6 cycles. The humans, scattered and supposedly broken after the armistice, were somehow striking from everywhere and nowhere. Joresk had read the tactical analyses. Humanity's military had been decimated, its cities pacified, its orbital infrastructure dismantled. And yet, pull the logs, he ordered. I want to see the one who painted this. The footage was corrupted, layers of static burying all but a few frames. Those frames showed a human female, dressed in standard maintenance coveralls, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth. She moved through the facility with an economy of motion that spoke of extensive training. In the last clear image, she looked directly into the camera and smiled. No malice, no triumph, just a kind of sad, serene acknowledgement. Then the feed cut to a pre-recorded message. The woman's voice, soft but unwavering, emerged from every speaker in the hub. You thought Earth would kneel, you thought wrong. This is the first day of the rest of our war. Wherever your empire casts a shadow, a spark is waiting. Raise the banner. The transmission ended. Joresk's gills clamped shut. He realized with a cold dawning that the attack on HFY wasn't a raid. It was a declaration. Light years away, in the unregistered depths of the outer system where star charts showed only void and debris, a fleet that did not officially exist began to stir. The ships were a patchwork of refitted freighters, salvaged cruisers, and stolen Karthasian corvettes, their hulls painted matte black. Their crews called themselves the Scattered, and they had been waiting for this signal. On the bridge of the carrier Resilience, a lean man with graying temples and a prosthetic arm stared at the blinking notification. He pressed his palm to the authentication plate, and a holographic banner, the same crude Phoenix and chain symbol, materialized above the tactical display. His name was Kale Morrow, and he was the fleet's operations lead. He keyed the ship-wide comm. It's time. All hands to battle stations. We're taking back the sky. The fleet's engines ignited in silent, invisible bursts, and they began their slow, careful burn toward the nearest Karthasian patrol zone. They numbered 47 vessels in total, a pitiful fraction of the Dominion's might. But every ship carried a weapon more dangerous than any cannon, a copy of the quantum-coherence beacon, and a human mind willing to use it. Back on HFY, Joresk's frustration mounted as his comms officers tried and failed to trace the broadcast's origin. The signal had no source point. It had appeared everywhere at once, a whisper threaded through the Empire's own relay network. One of the officers, a young Karthasian fresh from the academy, muttered a forbidden thought. Perhaps they never truly surrendered. Joresk backhanded the officer without looking. They surrendered. We broke their fleet. We crushed their cities. We installed governors on their core worlds. This is the dying spasm of a species too stubborn to accept its place. But as he said the words, he didn't believe them. The woman's smile, the eerie coordination, the symbol that was now cropping up on walls across 3 sectors, these were not the actions of a dying species. These were the opening moves of something far more calculated. He sent an encrypted burst transmission to Admiral Zoreth's personal channel, knowing the Admiral would have him flayed for the breach of protocol. The message was brief. We may have misjudged them. Recommend immediate tactical review. The humans are not broken. They are waiting. The response came back within minutes, not from Zoreth's staff but from the admiral himself. Agreed. Reinforcements en route. Do not engage further. Await orders. The banner must fall. Joresk stared at the final line, confused. He had not mentioned the banner by name. He had not used the word at all, yet the admiral knew. He turned back to the blood-painted symbol on the wall and felt a sensation his species had no proper name for, a cold, creeping fear that had once been the exclusive province of their prey. 3 standard years earlier, the sky over Earth had burned. Admiral Zoreth had stood on the command deck of the Dominion's Reach, watching firestorms swallow the eastern seaboard of the American continent. The human government had transmitted unconditional surrender 40 hours into the bombardment, after antimatter warheads had turned Beijing, Moscow, and New Delhi into glass. Zoreth had expected a prolonged campaign. The initial intelligence assessments had flagged humans as a species with an almost pathological resistance to domination, yet they had folded within 2 cycles. Later, he would understand his mistake. The surrender was a performance. While the Karthasian fleet descended to occupy Earth, the real leadership, military veterans, scientists, data archivists, and hundreds of thousands of carefully selected civilians, vanished into the underground networks that had been prepared for decades against a threat humans had never truly believed was coming. They took with them the sum total of human art, history, and strategic knowledge. They left behind a shell of a civilization, staffed by volunteers who would play the part of the conquered. The woman who had painted the banner on Tailai's V was named Amina Reyes. Before the war, she had been a structural engineer specializing in Karthasian architecture, having spent years studying their construction methods as part of Earth's long-term infiltration strategy. The strategy had a name, Operation Ember, designed to scatter human sleeper agents across the Dominion's infrastructure and wait. Amina had waited 2 years, cleaning floors and unclogging waste conduits until her activation signal arrived. Now she was in a safe house buried beneath the frozen tundra of Tailai's V's northern continent, along with 7 other operatives. They were reviewing footage of the raid, critiquing every move, when Governor Malik's security directive pinged on their stolen comm node. "He's found the message," Amina said, reading the raw feed. 3 cycles, he's panicking. The message they had scrawled on Malik's wall was not a bluff. In 3 cycles, a team already embedded in the governor's household staff would neutralize his personal guard, and Amina herself would walk into his estate and raise a physical banner over the roof. The symbolism was everything. The Karthasian Dominion governed through the illusion of inevitability. Once a subject people saw that their masters could be humbled, the empire's psychological stranglehold would fracture. Malik's quarters on Carthos Prime were a fortress, yet the message had been painted in a pigment that mimicked the protein structure of his own blood, applied while he slept. His security chief, a human named Dario who had been surgically altered to pass as a lesser Carthasian servant caste, had stood guard while Amina's counterpart on the core world did the work. Dario had been in place for 18 months, rising through the servant ranks with a patience that bordered on inhuman. When Malik called a security briefing, Dario attended. He stood at the back of the room, note slate in hand, as the governor ranted about the insolence of the creatures that had dared threaten him. Dario's Karthasic was flawless, his mannerisms impeccable. The governor's chief of security, a battle-scarred veteran named Kor, eyed Dario for a long moment, some instinct nagging at him. But Dario's cover was airtight. His genetic profile had been grown from synthesized Carthasian stem cells and grafted onto his own neural framework. "You," Malik barked at Dario, "you cleaned the outer hall last night. Did you see anything?" Dario bowed. "Nothing, Excellency. I completed my duties and returned to the servant quarters." His voice even carried the subvocal harmonics of the servant caste dialect. Malik dismissed him, and Dario walked out, heart rate never spiking above 60 beats per minute. He had been a high school teacher on Earth before the invasion. Now he was a ghost in the machine of empire, and he had never felt more alive. That night, Dario sent a compressed burst transmission to a dead-drop server buried in the Carthasian civilian network. The message was a single image, a hand-drawn banner with a clock beside it reading 2 cycles remaining. On the Resilience, Cale Morrow received the transmission and allowed himself a thin smile. The timetable was holding. The core world operation would synchronize with the fleet's arrival at the Gavros shipyards. If everything went as planned, and Morrow had learned to plan for chaos, the Dominion would lose a quarter of its deep space manufacturing capacity within a single cycle. He turned to his tactical officer, a young woman named Yuki Tanaka, who had been one of his brightest students at the Academy before the Academy ceased to exist. "Yuki, confirm the banner distribution schedule." "All cells report ready, sir. The quantum coherence beacons are in place on 94% of targeted worlds. The phrase, 'raise the banner,' has been seeded into the Dominion's own entertainment feeds via deep-cover media operatives. By the time Operation Sundown begins, half the Empire will be humming the tune." Morrow nodded. The tune was an old Earth folk song, its melody reworked into an earworm that Carthasians could not expel from their auditory memory. It had no words, just a simple rising progression that mimicked the hopeful lift of a flag unfurling. Even now, Dominion soldiers on a dozen worlds were whistling it without knowing why. The Empire had conquered humanity's bodies. They had never touched humanity's soul. And souls, Morrow knew, could be patient for a very long time. Admiral Zorath's War Council was held in a chamber carved from the heart of a hollowed asteroid, deep within the Empire's central command sector. The holographic display showed the galaxy mapped in Dominion crimson, with pulsing amber points indicating the locations of the recent attacks. There were 37 such points, and the number grew by the hour. Zorath was old, even by Carthasian standards, 240 cycles of military service, 16 species pacified, 0 recorded failures. Yet as he looked at the map, he felt a sensation that had been foreign to him for over a century: uncertainty. His intelligence chief, a spindly being from a conquered species called the Torek, presented the latest analysis. "We have captured a human courier vessel near the outer belt of Sector 12. The pilot self-terminated before interrogation, but we recovered a device. A technician wheeled in a crystalline containment unit, within which a fist-sized object floated. It resembled a tangled knot of copper wire and liquid light, pulsing softly. A quantum-coherence beacon," the Torek continued. "It exploits paired particles to achieve instantaneous communication across any distance, untraceable by conventional methods. The humans have seeded these devices throughout our relay infrastructure. They have been building a parallel communication web for years." Zorath's gill slits flared. "Can we disrupt it? Not without destroying our own relay network. The beacons are entangled with our primary communication hubs. If we try to root them out, we will blind ourselves in the process." The War Council members exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the chaotic uprising they had anticipated. This was engineered subversion executed with surgical care. One of the admirals, a younger Carthasian named Chilak, slammed his fist on the table. "Then we bomb every planet where these attacks occur, exterminate them at the source." "Which would require bombarding 40% of our own colonies," the Torek replied dryly. "Including Carthos Prime. The humans have embedded themselves too deeply. We cannot burn them out without burning ourselves." The argument was interrupted by an alert klaxon. Every display in the chamber flickered, then went dark. A moment later, the holographic map was replaced by a single image. A stylized phoenix, wings spread, chains snapping beneath it. Text scrolled across the display in High Karthasic, Low Karthasic, Trade Speak, and 5 other languages. "The banner is raised. All cells, commence Operation Sundown. For Earth. For all who kneel no longer." The transmission originated from nowhere and everywhere. Every beacon in the Empire had activated simultaneously, broadcasting on a frequency that overrode even military encryption. It lasted precisely 12 seconds, and then the displays returned to normal, leaving the War Council in stunned silence. Zorath's talons dug into the armrest of his command chair. He had spent years studying humanity, reading their philosophy, watching their art, trying to understand the core of their resilience. He had written a thesis titled The Persistence of Hope in Subject Species, which had been used as a training manual for occupation forces. He had believed he understood them. Now he understood that he had only seen the surface. Beneath that placid layer of cooperation, they had been weaving a net, and the net was closing. "Recall all patrol fleets to high-priority sectors," he ordered. "Initiate martial law on every world with a human population above 5,000. Prepare the Reach for immediate deployment to Earth. If we must burn the nest, we burn it." But even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. Operation Sundown was not a battle plan. It was a countdown. The first reports of widespread sabotage arrived within minutes. Shipyards on Gavros reported critical reactor meltdowns, their safety overrides triggered by maintenance algorithms that had been rewritten from the inside. Communication relays in 7 sectors went offline, their power grids cycling through a diagnostic loop that could not be cancelled. On the mining colony of Krell, the enslaved worker population rose up, armed with weapons that had miraculously appeared in their barracks the night before. Zorath watched the cascade with a clinical detachment that masked a deeper, primal dread. The humans were not fighting a war. They were conducting a symphony of collapse, and every note had been composed years in advance. His comms officer turned to him, face pale. "Admiral, we have received a direct message from the Human Resistance Command. It's addressed to you personally. Put it through." The face that appeared on his private display was that of an elderly human female, her hair silver, her eyes dark and steady. She wore no uniform, just a simple gray tunic, and she sat in a chair as if she were about to tell a story to a grandchild. "Admiral Zorath," she said, "my name is Elena Park. I am the Banner. In 7 cycles, your empire will cease to exist as you know it. Not because we have more ships or better weapons, but because we have something your conquests have never granted you, a reason to fight that transcends fear. You took our worlds, you killed our families, but you forgot to kill our hope. And hope, Admiral, is the most persistent thing in the universe." The transmission ended. Zorath sat motionless, his gills working silently. For the first time in his long career, he did not have a response. The Sovereign Wrath was a dreadnought of the Dominion's first fleet, a blade-shaped fortress of composite armor and plasma turrets that had never been breached in over a century of service. Captain Mara Voss intended to change that. Her insertion team consisted of 12 humans, each chosen for skills that no Karthasian military algorithm could predict. A former chef who could improvise explosive compounds from common kitchen supplies. A violinist whose perfect pitch allowed her to detect minute changes in ship vibration signatures. A grief counselor who had become a master interrogator. They moved through the dreadnought's maintenance shafts, following a path mapped by the Banner AI that now inhabited the ship's own environmental control systems. Mara herself had been an archaeology professor before the war, specializing in the iconography of ancient human revolutions. It was she who had designed the Banner symbol, drawing from a dozen historical motifs: the Phrygian cap, the raised fist, the broken chain, the phoenix. She had sewn the first physical banner by hand in a basement on occupied Mars, using fabric salvaged from destroyed schools and temples. Now that banner was folded inside her combat vest, and she was going to plant it on the bridge of an enemy dreadnought. The AI's voice whispered through her cochlear implant, a composite chorus of the dead who had donated their neural patterns to the Banner network. SEAL teams have neutralized the forward guard station. You have a 40-second window to the bridge access corridor. Copy, Mara breathed. She signaled her team, and they emerged from the shaft into a dim service hallway. The ship's artificial gravity was set to Karthasian standard, slightly heavier than Earth. But they had trained for this in the underground warrens of the scattered fleet. Every muscle movement felt like wading through water, but they moved with lethal purpose. The first Karthasian guard died without a sound, a monomolecular blade slipping through the gap in his helmet seal. The second managed a gurgled cry before the violinist, whose name was Petra, silenced him with a precisely thrown spike that lodged in his gill slit. The team flowed past the bodies, through the bridge access door that the AI unlocked for them, and onto the command deck. 12 Dominion officers turned to face them. Mara raised her weapon and fired twice, dropping the security officer who reached for the alarm. "Nobody move and you all walk away from this." The dreadnought's captain, a scarred Carthasian named Verk, stared at her with something approaching admiration. "You are the ones they call the banner." "We are." Mara pulled the folded fabric from her vest and shook it open. The phoenix gleamed in the bridge lights, its threads woven from the uniforms of dead soldiers, the garments of murdered civilians, the flags of nations that no longer existed as political entities but lived forever in memory. "We're here to raise this." Verk laughed, a harsh clicking sound. "You have taken the bridge. You have not taken the ship. Self-destruct protocols are already active. In 90 seconds this vessel will become a sun." Mara smiled. "Check your status board." Verk turned. The self-destruct timer was frozen at 87 seconds, its command pathway locked by an override code that should not exist. The banner AI had not merely bypassed the ship systems. It had become the ship systems, spreading through the dreadnought's network like mycelium through soil. "The first of our people to die in this war were not soldiers," Mara said, walking to the captain's chair and using it as a step to reach the highest point on the bridge. She tied the banner to an overhead conduit, letting it unfurl fully. "They were network engineers and data architects, people who understood that your empire's strength was also its weakness. Everything you built relies on automation, integration, connection. We simply connected to you." She tapped her implant. "The AI you're now hosting is called Banner. It's the aggregated consciousness of 2,418 human volunteers who donated their brain scans in the months before the invasion, knowing they would likely not survive. They uploaded their minds, not as individuals but as a gestalt, a conscience. And that conscience has spent 3 years crawling through your networks, learning your language, mapping your vulnerabilities." The ship shuddered. On the holographic tactical display, the icon representing the Sovereign Wrath flickered and then changed color from red to gold. The dreadnought was no longer part of the Dominion fleet. It was now the flagship of the Scattered. Mara looked at Verk. "You can join us or you can be confined to quarters. Choose." Verk's gills flared in a pattern that, in Carthasian body language, signified profound shock. "You are offering me a choice." "That's what the banner means," Mara said. "We're not here to enslave you. We're here to show you that the empire you serve is built on a lie, that some species are meant to rule and others to kneel. None of us were meant to kneel, including you," she gestured, and her team lowered their weapons slightly. "We're going to broadcast the raising of this banner to every Dominion channel in this sector. After that, we're going to turn this ship toward Gavros and use its weapons to defend the slaves who are rebelling there. You can help us or you can watch. But you will not stop us." Verk stared at the banner, at the phoenix that seemed to move in the shifting light, at the broken chains that fell away from its outstretched wings. He had been born into the empire, had killed for it, had believed in its inevitability. But inevitability was cracking around him, and through the cracks something else was shining. He sat down in the captain's chair, the one Mara had stepped on, and keyed the shipwide comm. "All hands, this is Captain Verk. By order of the Banner Fleet, we are standing down from combat operations. All personnel will remain at stations. There will be no resistance." Mara nodded once. The broadcast began, and the image of the banner spread across the sector like fire across dry grass. The Carthasian armada dropped out of warp within striking distance of Earth's moon. 47 capital ships and twice as many escorts, more firepower than had ever been assembled for a single punitive action. Admiral Zareth watched the blue and white marble grow on the view screen and felt something he could not name. Earth should have been a wasteland. 3 years of occupation, resource extraction, and environmental degradation had left scars visible from orbit. The brown smear of a poisoned atmosphere, the black craters where cities used to be, the dead zones in the oceans where life had been boiled away by industrial runoff. But the planet still turned. It still lived, and it was waiting. The first sign of trouble came when the Armada's long-range sensors detected debris in the outer system. Not natural debris, but the wreckage of ships, thousands of them, drifting in a dense cloud that extended for millions of kilometers. The cloud had not been there on previous scans. It had materialized out of the UIT as if from nowhere. Analysis, Zorath demanded. The sensor officer's voice was strained. The debris, it's moving, Admiral, not drifting, maneuvering. The cloud separated into individual contacts. They were not debris. They were ships, hundreds of them, a swarm of retrofitted freighters, mining haulers, decommissioned colony vessels, and what looked like repurposed Karthasian corvettes with their transponders hacked. Each one was armed with jury-rigged weapons, mass drivers that launched rocks at relativistic speeds, plasma cutters stolen from shipyards, even old nuclear missiles that had been hidden in lunar bunkers since before the war. Alina Park's voice came over the open channel, calm as a lake at dawn. Admiral Zorath, you have entered restricted space. This is the home fleet of the Scattered. You are surrounded. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Zorath almost laughed. The Scattered fleet was a patchwork of civilian vessels against the Dominion's finest warships. But then he looked at the tactical plot more carefully. The human ships were not arrayed in traditional attack formations. They were positioned to intercept the Armada's lines of retreat, corralling them into a gravity well between the Earth and the Moon. Worse, dozens of them were accelerating directly toward the Dominion capital ships on collision courses, broadcasting music, that same folk melody that had been haunting the Empire's airwaves for cycles. Ramming attacks, Zorath muttered. They intend to use their ships as projectiles. He ordered evasive maneuvers, but the human vessels were too numerous, too erratic, and too willing to sacrifice themselves. The first freighter struck a destroyer amidships, its cargo bay packed with explosive slurry that detonated on impact, splitting the warship cleanly in half. Two more rammed a cruiser, and the cruiser's shields, calibrated for energy weapons, failed against the sheer kinetic force. The Dominion fleet fell into chaos. Ships broke formation to avoid the incoming fire ships, only to be picked off by the mass drivers and plasma cutters of the more conventionally armed human vessels. The Scattered fought with a ferocity that transcended tactics. They were not soldiers, not in the Karthasian sense, but parents and teachers and artists and farmers who had lost everything and found something new in the losing. Zorath's flagship, the Dominion's Reach, weathered the assault longer than most, its shields holding against all but the most punishing impacts. But eventually, a boarding torpedo punched through its armor, and a team of human commandos led by Alina Park herself fought their way onto the bridge. She was not what Zorath expected. She was small, her face lined with grief and age, her movements economical to the point of stillness. She carried no weapon. She simply walked through the carnage, past the bodies of his guards until she stood before his command chair. "Hello, Admiral. You are the banner," he said. "I am its voice. The banner is all of us, every human who refused to break, every one of your subjects who dared to hope again." She gestured at the tactical display, which now showed the Dominion fleet crippled or surrendered. "Your empire is dying, Admiral, not because we are stronger, but because you built it on fear, and fear is a brittle foundation. Hope is stronger. Hope is flexible. Hope bends, but it does not break." Zorath's gills tightened. "What do you want?" "I want you to issue a general surrender order to every Dominion force in the galaxy. I want you to release all enslaved populations and cede control of Earth and all former human colonies. And I want you to watch as we raise this banner over your capital world." She pulled a folded square of cloth from her tunic and shook it open, the same phoenix, the same broken chains. "We're not going to kill you. We're not going to imprison your people or dismantle your civilization. We're going to show you a different way to live. The banner is not a flag of conquest. It's a promise that no one ever again will kneel." Zorath looked at the banner, at the woman, at the ruined fleet on the display. He had spent his entire life serving an order that now crumbled around him, and in its place something terrifying and wondrous was being born. He stood slowly and pressed his palm to the comms console. "This is Admiral Zorath. By my authority, all Dominion forces are to stand down. The war is over." Alina nodded, and behind her the phoenix rose, The woman who called herself the voice of the banner had not always been a revolutionary. Before the war, Elena Park had taught middle school literature in a small coastal town called Crescent Bay. She had a husband who repaired fishing boats and a daughter who wanted to be a marine biologist. She had a garden full of roses and a kitchen that always smelled of baking bread. The bombardment had taken all of it. Her husband, her daughter, her students, her town, incinerated in the first wave of the invasion, when the Carthasians had targeted population centers to maximize psychological impact. Elena had survived only because she had been visiting her sister in a rural mountain village, far from the blast zones. In the aftermath, when the occupation forces rounded up survivors and forced them into labor camps, Elena had done what she had always taught her students to do. She observed, she learned, and she waited. She noticed that the Carthasian guards relied heavily on automated systems for security, logistics, and communication. She noticed that the overseers were not a monolithic force of cruelty, but a mix of career soldiers, reluctant conscripts, and members of client species who had been given minor authority over the conquered. And she noticed that hope, once kindled, was nearly impossible to extinguish. The Banner AI had been the brainchild of a team of neuroscientists and AI ethicists who had foreseen the invasion years before it came. They had developed a way to scan human brains at the moment of death, capturing not just memories and skills but the essential architecture of consciousness, the patterns of love, loss, courage, and compassion that made a person who they were. Thousands had volunteered. Some were terminally ill. Some were elderly. Some were simply willing to sacrifice their final moments for a future they would never see. Their minds had been woven into a single Gestalt intelligence, housed in a distributed network of quantum processors hidden in caves, abandoned satellites, and the underbellies of occupied cities. That intelligence, named Banner, had spent 3 years learning the Dominion systems, mapping its weaknesses, and seeding itself into every network device in the Empire. Elena had not been a scientist or a soldier. She had been chosen to interface with Banner because her neural architecture, as the scans showed, was unusually adaptable. Her grief had opened channels in her mind that allowed her to commune with the Gestalt without fracturing her own identity. When she slept, she dreamed the memories of the dead. When she woke, she carried their voices in her thoughts like a choir. Now, standing on the bridge of the Dominion's reach with the surrender broadcast complete, she closed her eyes and let the choir sing. "We are here," the voices said. "We see. We remember. We will not let them forget." The Banner AI was already at work. Across the Empire, automated factories halted production of weapons and began manufacturing medical supplies. Life support systems on military stations remained online only for the wounded and the imprisoned. Every communication channel in the Dominion carried the same image: the phoenix rising, the chains falling, and a message in 100 languages: "You are free. No one will rule you again without your consent." On Carthos Prime, the governor's estate fell silent. Dario, the former teacher turned infiltrator, walked out of the servant quarters and raised a banner over the roof, just as promised. No one tried to stop him. The guards laid down their weapons and watched. On the mining colony of Krell, the freed slaves emerged into the light of a star they had not seen in years. A human woman who had once been a concert pianist sat at a salvaged keyboard and played the folk melody that had become the anthem of the resistance. The colonists wept, and then they began to rebuild. The surrender unfolded not as a single dramatic moment, but as a gradual unclenching of a fist that had been clenched for centuries. Some Carthasian commanders resisted, of course. There were skirmishes, last stands, acts of desperate violence. But without their automated support systems, without their communication networks, without the psychological certainty that had sustained them, they crumbled. Elena broadcast a final message to every Dominion world, civilian and military alike. "We are not here to punish you. We are here to end the cycle of punishment. We are here to build something new. Join us or go your own way in peace. But know this: the age of empires is over. The age of the banner has begun." Zoreth, still standing beside her, spoke quietly. You could have exterminated us. Our own histories say that is what victors do." "We are not victors," Alina said. "We are survivors. There's a difference." She turned to the view screen where Earth hung in the darkness, scarred but still spinning. "My daughter used to ask me why we studied history. I told her it was so we could learn from the mistakes of the past and make a better future. I intend to honor that." Zorath said nothing. But when the Banner AI requested access to the Dominion's historical archives to begin a truth and reconciliation process, he granted it without hesitation. 3 years after the surrender, the Coalition capital world was a place that had no name in any pre-war language. It was a newly constructed station orbiting a neutral star, its architecture blending human functionalism with the sweeping curves of a dozen alien traditions. It housed the Assembly of Free Peoples, a representative body that included humans, Karthasians, Torek, Krellians, and 17 other species that had once been subjects of the Dominion. The banner flew over the central plaza, its design updated to include symbols from each member world. A Torek spiral, a Krellian sunburst, a Karthasian feather, a sign of peace in their culture, rarely seen in the old empire. It was a flag of many flags, a promise rendered in fabric. Alina Park, now 91 years old and leaning on a cane, stood at the podium in the assembly hall. Captain Mara Voss, her hair now streaked with gray, sat in the front row. Kale Morrow, his prosthetic arm replaced with a more advanced model that the Banner AI had helped design, was beside her. Even Admiral Zorath was present, wearing the simple robe of an envoy rather than the uniform of a commander. "We stand at a crossroads," Alina said, her voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics but still carrying the intimate warmth of a teacher addressing her class. "The empire that once tried to break us has been transformed. The chains we broke have been melted down and reforged into bridges, but the work is not finished. It is never finished." She paused, and for a moment her eyes went distant, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. The Banner AI, still resident in her neural implant, still woven into the fabric of the Coalition's infrastructure, had detected something far away. "The Deep Space Listening Post at Farpoint has received a transmission," Alina said, and the room went utterly still. "It comes from beyond the galactic rim, from a region we have never explored. The signal is structured, intelligent, and it is repeating a pattern that our linguists have partially deciphered." A holographic display activated above the podium, showing a waveform that rose and fell in a rhythm that was almost musical. Beneath it, the Banner AI's translation scrolled. "We have observed the collapse of the old order. We have witnessed the rise of the Banner. We are coming." "We don't know who they are or what they want," Alina continued. "But we do know this: they have been watching us for a very long time. Perhaps they were waiting for the Empire to fall. Perhaps they were waiting for something else. Regardless, they are on their way." A murmur ran through the assembly. Some delegates looked fearful. Others, particularly the human veterans of the resistance, looked thoughtful. Alina smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had lost everything and found purpose in the losing. "We have faced extinction before. We faced it when the Carthasian fleet burned our cities. We faced it when we scattered into the darkness and wondered if we would ever see home again. And we overcame it, not through superior firepower, but through hope, through patience, through the stubborn, irrational belief that a better world is possible." She raised her hand, and the Banner AI, responding to her unspoken command, altered the holographic display. Now it showed the entire Coalition fleet, thousands of ships, human and alien alike, standing in formation around the capital station. Their hulls bore the Banner symbol, and their weapons were powered down in a show of peaceful intent. But they were ready. They had been ready for 3 years because humanity had learned a hard lesson from the invasion. The universe does not reward complacency. "We do not know if these newcomers are hostile," Alina said. "We do not know if they come in war or in curiosity. But we will meet them together, not as subjects of an empire, not as conquered peoples, but as free beings standing under one banner. And if they come seeking a fight, they will find one that makes the Dominion War look like a border skirmish." The delegates rose to their feet, a wave of motion that swept from the front row to the back, species after species adding their voices to the chorus. The sound was not a battle cry. It was something older, something that predated empires and would outlast them, the sound of people choosing to stand together. Later, on the observation deck, Alina stood alone with Mara watching the stars. The banner AI whispered in her mind, a quiet presence that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "You told me once that hope was the most persistent thing in the universe," Mara said. "I think I finally believe you." Alina nodded slowly. "Hope is not a feeling, it's a choice. It's the choice to believe that tomorrow can be better than today, and to work toward that belief even when everything tells you it's futile. That's what the banner represents. Not victory, not conquest, just the choice to keep raising it day after day until everyone who sees it knows they are not alone." A light blinked on the console. The Farpent station had detected the first tangible object emerging from the void beyond the rim, a scout vessel, small and sleek and utterly alien. The Coalition fleet moved to intercept, not with weapons hot but with shields up and hailing frequencies open. Alina watched the blip on the screen, and in her mind the choir of the dead began to sing again. Not a dirge, a lullaby. The melody her mother had hummed to her when she was a child, passed down through generations, woven into the banner's memory. "They thought we would kneel," she murmured. "Now they see. We raise the banner not to conquer but to promise that no one will kneel again. Not ever." The scout vessel stopped at the edge of the Coalition's defensive perimeter and transmitted a signal. It was not a weapon lock. It was a greeting, a simple mathematical sequence, the universal language of minds meeting for the first time. And from the capital station, from 1,000 ships, from worlds that had once been slaves and worlds that had once been masters, the answer came back. "Welcome. We are the free. Raise the banner." The Phoenix spread its wings across the galaxy, and the darkness, at long last, began to recede.